Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tina Walla with US Digital Response, and I am delighted to welcome our volunteers, our government partners, and our broader community to today's Brunch and Learn with the incredible Joy Bonaguro, who I'm so excited to hear from today. If this is your first time joining a USDR Brunch and Learn, this is a speaker series with leaders from the worlds of civic tech, public policy, and beyond. They're a special way for us to have time with thoughtful, smart people with deep expertise in diverse fields. And I'm particularly excited for today's Brunch and Learn for 3 reasons. First, it's been a minute since we've done one of these. And we're really excited about bringing them back as a more frequent session. And so as a preview, we're going to invite your feedback on today's session. And I hope that you'll share your thoughts on the type of content you want to hear, you want to see. What do you want to learn about? Who do you want to hear from? Let us know and we'll make it happen. The second reason I'm really excited for today is that today's special in that this Brunch and Learn is open to the public. To date, these Brunch and Learns have been a special venue for active USDR volunteers. But today we have active volunteers, we have alumni volunteers, we have government partners, I see y'all, we have staff and the broader community. And I'm just really excited for all of us to get to spend this time together and learn from Joy. Joy is the third reason I'm really excited for today. Joy's a legend. When I worked in the city, yes, you are. When I worked in the city of Seattle, Joy was in San Francisco. And I will tell you, we all knew Joy. We all followed her work, the great work she was doing. And so this is really great. This is going to be a real treat for all of us to hear from her and to get some her thoughts on some questions. So I hope you will, as Joy's doing her presentation, drop questions in the chat and we'll make sure that we sort through those and get those to her so you can hear directly from her. Now I'm gonna just briefly introduce Joy and then I'm gonna zip it so we can hear from her. So Joy Bonaguro has spent her career working at the nexus of data, design, technology, and policy. She was appointed as Chief Data Officer for the great state of California with an overarching goal to improve government use of data. Prior to her state role, she was at Corelight, a high-growth cybersecurity startup founded by Accel and General Catalyst. And before Corelight, she served as the first Chief Data Officer for the city and county of San Francisco, where she pioneered multiple initiatives to introduce data science, streamline data access, improve data management, and boost capacity to use data. Joy's career started in New Orleans, and she earned her master's degree from UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy and her bachelor's in mathematics and philosophy from Tulane University. Talk about an awesome dual degree. Joy, thanks so much for being here. I'm now going to pass you the mic for your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and really excited to talk to this group of people. I actually, I have slides, but I retailed at USDR Brunch and Discuss because, I have my perspective. I'm actually really curious to hear from you all and get your perspective and reactions. So with that, thank you so much, Tina, Kristen, the USDR team for having me. And with that, I will share my screen and you all will tell me if I'm doing it correctly, hopefully. Is that good?
Good. Looks great.
All right, wonderful. All right, so several years ago, maybe 2015 thereabouts, this was when I was in San Francisco, I was called into a meeting to discuss a problem. And the problem was that we had this huge push where we wanted to collect records digitally, but we had this wet ink signature requirements that were sort of throwing us for a loop. Like, how could we get to digital collection if we had this wet signature requirement? And so we were discussing everything from optical character recognition, and we were like, oh, maybe we could have a summer intern scanning program, you name it. We were sort of brainstorming all these ideas, including buying very large scanning equipment or partnering with the library because they had that. So at one point towards the end of the meeting, there was a ledge staffer. So this was an aide to one of the supervisors who was just like, wait, why don't we just write a global policy and remove the requirement for wet ink signatures and just fix it wherever it's required in local law? And I just remember sitting, sort of slumping back in my chair and literally slapping myself mentally because, I'd slipped into the stance of accepting the rules versus questioning them and writing them. And this experience is sort of one of my many inspirations for this talk that's been sort of swirling in my brain and body for years now. And I'm really going to structure it around a set of digital delusions and then what I think are remedies that have, the digital delusions have had the civic tech movement sort of seeing every problem as a nail needing a digital hammer. And I'm going to sort of talk through why I think that's a flawed premise. So, and it starts with digital delusion number 1, which I call we can wag the dog. The digital world has a bit of a savior complex. Digital saviors sort of want to swoop in and be the hero and save the day. And I think there's been a lot more acknowledgement recently that this is something to address. But what it means in practice is that the digital actually finds itself wanting to be the tail that wags the dog, but it doesn't realize that it's not actually dealing with a dog. That's not what it is. The dog is actually an elephant, and that elephant has like a tiny little tail, and it's really heavy, right? And because what is actually happening is that digital teams are essentially entering at the end of a very long and complex process. And it starts with this sort of primordial policy soup. It's sort of, think of it as a tar pit of ideas, right? And then, sort of once in a while, a policy window opens, an elected has an idea or reads an article, or, some lobbyist gets in there, or there's a crisis, or there's a news article. But anyway, one of our little policy ideas sort of gets extracted from the policy soup and makes it through that policy window. At which point it enters, the sausage making factory, and it kind of roams around in the factory for a while. It doesn't automatically become law. It has to get enough friends, figure out the equipment, all of that. And if our little friend is lucky, they get to turn into a piece of statute. And you're like, okay, great, we're at statute. And it's like, nope, still not done, because that statute has essentially allocated a bunch of responsibilities on one or more entities, and they've sort of dumped the statute on them. And then it turns out that each of those entities that have some responsibility in this statute actually have, their own little sausage making process that they go through. And then there's regulatory writing, and there's lobbying, and more lobbying, right? It's a whole nother sausage making process. And out of that sausage making process usually pops out a few different things or subsets of things. You might get regulations, additional rules, policies, and maybe at the end, there's the need for a digital service. It's one of the things that come out of that statute. So when we put digital in its context, it's less of a digital hero and more like a digital janitor, right? And it's kind of on cleanup crew. And it's an important crew. It's a very, very important crew, but nonetheless, it's a little late to the process. And so what I feel is often happening is that digital teams are sort of like a bunch of people get dropped in a padded room, and they're like, we're totally going to redesign this room. It's going to be amazing. They don't know why they're in the room. They don't know how to get out of the room, and they might beat their heads against the wall because ultimately it's so late in the process. And of course, the cost of this we might be redesigning sludge, right? It's still sludge. But also more importantly, I think burnout and delusionment for all these people are coming in with their energies and their talents and into government modernization. So on to digital delusion number 2, we can remove complexity, right? And the analogy I like to come here is the sources of complexity in government are sort of like the Mississippi River system. They have multiple sources. One source is the sheer size and range of services, right? In San Francisco, we used to joke that we did everything from A to Z, the airport to the zoo. And at the state, we do anything from monitor the snow cap and watershed to issuing driver's licenses. And the complexity results here because you can't necessarily translate between services or repurpose, as business processes may be quite different. essentially governments are the most complex business conglomerate of all, right? They are in tons of different lines of businesses. And then as we saw during COVID, different levels of government does different things, right? Health regulations are issued at the county level in California, while the state helped acquire the supply of vaccines. And what this leads to is complexities around coordination. There are literally tens of thousands of jurisdictions in California, for example. And they all have different processes and authority and budget and all these kinds of and priorities, right? Because they're locally elected in a lot of cases. And then, of course, like any large complex organization, you get what I call bureaucratic accretion, right? Complexity sort of just builds up over time. And we're not alone in this. This is every large company, every large organization. My husband works at a private company. They have bureaucratic processes just like we do in government. And so I would say that digital is best positioned to help with this last one, right? I think you can pull off like a solid B+ on bureaucratic accretion within a service area. But working across a range of services, it sort of gets a bit tougher, right? And I'm going to sort of give you a B-, right? In terms of like your ability to ultimately succeed. And then when we're talking about working across boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries get super tricky. And honestly, I personally have not seen a lot of success, but I'm going to give it a gentleman's C. It's got potential. But unfortunately, we've only talked about the eastern tributaries, right? And the water flows from the Rockies are a bit trickier to navigate. And I'll start by grouping them into sort of a bunch of baked in requirements, the ones that are sort of handed to you. They're set by statute or policy, and you can't really change them. Some of these are accidental, right? The people who are writing it just didn't realize, they didn't know what they were doing, that they were creating a tricky requirement to implement, or, you know, they just didn't understand, right? And sometimes you can expose those issues to the rule makers and maybe they can fix it, but actually opening up statute, reopening it is really hard to do and pretty painful. And then some might be well-intentioned, but sort of flawed in implementation. And you might be able to convince folks to change them. But again, you could run into political issues where it's like, I worked on that. I'm not going to like edit the legislation I already did, right? And then we have requirements that are actually designed to be complex. And it's really, for me, this got very personal and has been personal for many years. So I have a brother who's special needs. And for many, many years, I advocated my family, guys, we have to get them enrolled in services. We can't do this on our own. We need help. You know, I finally convinced my family to sort of make the sort of familial lifts to pull that off. But honestly, it was an exhausting maze-like process that took more than 2 years. And it's ongoing and will be ongoing the rest of our lives, right? In the US, a lot of this is by design, because it's in fact and in part a fallout of an incredible focus on minimizing waste, fraud, and abuse, right? Unfortunately, these complex rules by design, they really keep us from pursuing easier, simpler ways of providing benefits, and not just by like rewriting a digital service around a benefit. You know, for just one example, there's a growing body of evidence around simplifying benefits access by just shifting to direct cash transfers, right? There's a lot less to do if you just do that. But instead of having that policy conversation, which is an important, I'm not going to lie, hard policy conversation, we end up digitizing these really complex benefits programs along, or like having an eligibility requirements sorter, all these kinds of things, and, you know, text messages and all of that, which is great, but we're still just adding overall to like cost and complexity if we don't get at the root of that, the complexity of the rulemaking structure. And I want to flag one more sort of impact of baked-in requirements. In the private sector, you know, you have this product idea and you sort of iterate against the market until you sort of spiral to a product fit. And then eventually you might even be like, you know what, we don't need this product anymore, or we're going to combine it, or we're going to pivot. You know, when I was working at Corelight, we pivoted a bunch of times in just like the time I was there. But what happens when you have baked in requirements and you don't get to choose your customers, right? We don't get to pick our market or our customers in government. They're mandated. So in short, you're never, the message here is you're never going to be able to fully remove the complexity via digital service delivery and design. which leads me to digital delusion number 3. We can fix services to fix government. So I'll try and keep this one shorter, but the reality is that government comes in many flavors. We do a bunch of other stuff than provide just services. One, we're funder. We fund services that other people provide. So a lot of departments at the state of California, they actually don't do service delivery. They provide funds for a county to do it. But then when I was at the county actually outsourced a lot of its service delivery to nonprofits. So we're a funder. How do you transform government if you're only focused on service delivery? It's a regulator, right? We regulate activities, products, and services like ice cream, weights and measures. That's all the fun stuff there. I swear to God, containers are getting smaller. And they say they're the same pound. I know there's a regulatory entity that works on that. We also provide firefighting and emergency response, right? And of course, there's some service components there, but not always. A lot of it's like, coordination and management issues. We monitor the environment. I mentioned the snow cap earlier, right? Also, big parts of government, we're explorers, right? Like NASA, we're exploring space and beyond, or new technologies. That's why we make major investments in universities and basic science and have tech transfer programs to help make things into the market, right? There's a whole palette of government funding and investment in there. And yes, we also provide services. But what this means is that if your goal is to modernize government digital services, you're actually just working on one piece of the puzzle. And I think this overemphasizing of services has led to a chant that I feel I hear quite often nowadays. And when I heard this for the first time, I was a little confused. So I decided to write a memo to digital government activists everywhere. We need demos and memos. Background: in recent years, the civic tech community has been chanting demos, not memos. This chant is grounded in the belief that it's more effective to build than to explain. While I agree that demos are an effective method to show decision makers that a policy problem can be addressed, they are less effective for the following: succinctly communicating topics and issues that cannot be built, stopping something bad from happening, advocating for new ideas, especially when you have no resources, summarizing the impact or results of a service, and exploring the pros and cons of doing something. I have personally written memos that have ensured scientists can remotely access supercomputing facilities from around the world, blocked spending $80 million on something we didn't need, stopped many bad ideas from making it into statute, and led to the creation of the state's contact tracing program. In short, memos can be very powerful, and it's about solving the problem at hand using the most appropriate approach. Early in my career, someone told me, always respect other people's expertise. And this is something where there's real expertise to respect and learn from. Now for the remedies, and it's got to be a little herbal since I'm in California. My dad calls it the land of fruits and nuts. Remedy 1, I think we need to dethrone digital as the center of the government transformation universe. We're kind of like astronomy before the Copernican revolution, right? Instead, we should be embracing a constellation of competencies with different core centers of gravity. Here are some of them, right? It includes digital, of course, but process redesign, which can be baked into digital and often is, AI, data science, performance management, but also evaluation, pay for success, randomized control trials, more behavioral economics, all these kinds of things that can point to alternative policy solutions as well. And I'm sure there's more out here. This is just some competencies that I think we need to broaden and focus on. Remedy number 2 is write the rules, don't digitize them, right? Rules are not written in stone, and even if they were, they can be smashed. Rules are written by people and they can be edited and deleted. I personally get very involved in the rule-making process, and you should too. So the next time you have a choice between hiring another engineer versus a policy person, pause and rethink it. Maybe that's not what you need. And I think it's worth taking a step back in time. And so if this thing that we're all working on is this century's version of government reform, let's go back to the original wave of government reform over 100 years ago. And the primary focus at that time was how to reduce, in particularly through the US context, and I'll just note that, was to reduce corruption by changing the rules of hiring and buying. In the US, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act is a great example, right? It was explicitly designed to undo what was known as the spoils system, where the spoils go to the winner. In this case, the spoils were government jobs. And the practice was to give jobs to your political supporters, which still happens through certain political appointment jobs and these kinds of things. But this essentially drove the creation of the civil service class and, civil service hiring practices all around reducing corruption and getting past the spoils system. And so these critical reforms, they were about changing the rules of government, not digitizing them. The last remedy, embrace the bureaucracy. I see a lot of would-be change makers come in and obsess about getting face time with electeds all the time. A lot of time during COVID response, we'd have volunteers and they just like, we got to get in front of the electeds. And I was often like, why? And I think it's worth stepping back and understanding that different institutional roles have different functions in different time horizons. And so electeds are absolutely critical. They set the agenda and they really set the priorities, but it's usually up to the civil service to implement it. And so I've created this little 2x2 matrix to help you navigate these different perspectives. So on the y-axis, we have our electeds and our appointees, and they have their key priorities. They also have stuff that they care about and they support, but it's just not, they can only have so many priorities, right? That's always the case. On the x-axis, we have our civil service, and they might be more or less supportive or excited about doing something. So if you're working on something that is a priority for electeds, they're way behind it, and the civil service is like, yo, yes, this is great. Have fun and enjoy the ride. You're sort of set for smooth sailing. Have fun, enjoy it. However, you might be working on an elected's priority that the civil service is just less excited about, right? And the thing to be aware of here is that you just might be facing constant headwinds, right? And this doesn't mean you shouldn't persevere, but take note and use this time to learn more about the complexity of actually getting things done in government change and understanding where the different stakeholder groups sit and where their position is, right? However, if neither group is focused on what you're doing, that means you're working the lower corner, and you should please consider returning to shore. I don't know why people spend time here, but I do see people spending time here. Usually they're coming in with a personal agenda, right? However, I encourage you to not forget about areas that get civil service really excited and the elected support, but that might not be their priority. That might be the thing, that's not a set of announceables for them, right? That may not be appealing to their full constituency. But I say, go for it. Personally, I have a ton of fun in this quadrant. It includes new procurement ideas and approaches, rewriting job classifications. We're doing a huge epic project on that right now, increasing capacity and training opportunities, lots of delicious stuff to work on in this space. But just make sure you pack provisions for the long haul, because you might have the wind speed. You might not have the wind speed of electoral priorities at your back, but that doesn't not mean that it's not important. And also it's a great way to make friends and develop relationships for when you're facing future headwinds where things are a little trickier to navigate. So in short, when we sort of over-index on electeds to sell our digital or our data pitch, whatever it is, you're missing many opportunities for deep institutional change, as lots of really important work can happen over that long haul. So with that, I encourage you to enjoy your own journey, and thank you for having me, and we'll shut up and just let us chat now and stop sharing.